God, why the hell am I still doing this? I muttered to myself, staring blankly at the blank page. I'm Audrey Collins, and you're about to learn why everything I've worked for, every decision I've made, has been a fight for recognition, especially when it feels like no one has ever truly seen me. But trust me, you're not ready for how this story ends. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of my mother's steady hands, arranging cupcakes on the tiered stand. She didn't look up as I stood there, staring at the frame on the wall, a picture of my freshly graduated medical school diploma. I tried to steady my breath, but the words my mother had just spoken still echoed in my mind. Jessica deserves it more, honey, she said, her voice soft but firm. I couldn't help but clench my fists. The stinging words hit me harder than any slap ever could. Why was I always the one left behind in this family? My mind raced, but I kept my face neutral as I spoke, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. We both graduated with honors, Mom. We had the same GPA, I said, my tone quieter than I intended, but still controlled. She sighed as if tired of explaining herself. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with that familiar expression of disappointment that had been a constant in my life. The kind that always seemed to say I wasn't quite good enough. Audrey, you've always been more resourceful than your sister. You've never needed as much help. Jessica didn't have the same opportunities you had. I could feel my heart tightening in my chest. I'd worked relentlessly for everything I had. The long hours in the lab, the sleepless nights trying to meet deadlines, the endless research projects I took on, all while maintaining a part-time job to make ends meet. All while Jessica had everything handed to her. It wasn't just about the financial support, it was the constant validation she received, the unwavering belief that she would succeed. They'd attended every one of her soccer games, cheered for every recital she had, while I sat in the background unseen. I took a deep breath. I don't understand, Mom. Why pay off all of Jessica's loans and not mine? We both worked for this. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pursed. Because Jessica didn't have a mentor like Dr. Fleming. You've always had someone looking out for you. That was the part that cut the deepest. Dr. Fleming was my research advisor. Yes, but I had earned that position through my own merit. I hadn't been gifted the opportunity. I had earned it through weeks of grueling work and sleepless nights. I hadn't been skiing in Aspen with the family. I'd been stuck in the lab, pushing myself to the edge just to prove that I was worthy of a mentor like Dr. Fleming. The unfairness of it all was suffocating. So, I'm being punished for that? I asked, trying to keep the hurt from my voice, but it slipped through. A crack in the facade I was desperately trying to maintain. No one's punishing you, Audrey, my father chimed in as he entered the room, his arm casually draping over my mother's shoulder. We're just being practical. Your sister needs more help than you do. You've always managed to do things on your own. More help? I echoed. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. How about the fact that Jessica got a new car for her birthday, while I got a gas station gift card? You've never been there for me the way you've been there for her. My father's gaze softened slightly, but the words that came next were no better than my mother's. You've always been more independent, Audrey. More resourceful. Resourceful, I repeated, the word burning in my chest. It was their explanation for never attending my research presentations in undergrad. It was their excuse for choosing to fly across the country to Jessica's volleyball tournaments instead of supporting me. Resourceful meant that I didn't need anything from them. I was supposed to be fine on my own, but nobody had asked if I was okay. Nobody had checked to see if I was struggling. I was just supposed to handle it. I felt tears pricking at the back of my eyes, but I swallowed them down. I refused to break down in front of them. Not now, not ever. I have to go, I said, breaking the silence that had settled around us like a heavy fog. I've got an early shift at the hospital tomorrow. Will you make it to Jessica's party? My mother asked, her voice filled with concern, but it wasn't for me. It was for how my absence might affect the grand celebration they had planned for Jessica. I nodded, unable to speak. I didn't trust myself to say anything more without the raw anger spilling out. The pain that had been festering for years had finally reached its breaking point, but I couldn't voice it, not now. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Dr. Fleming. Need to speak with you urgently about the Patterson Fellowship. Big news. I froze, staring at the screen. A cold realization settled over me. My parents' favoritism wasn't just unfair, it was about to become publicly humiliating. The irony of it all was almost too much to bear. For once, something good was happening to me, something that would put me in the spotlight for the first time in my life. But it wasn't the kind of attention I wanted. It wasn't the kind of recognition I had ever dreamed of. It was going to be all about Jessica's debt-free celebration. How could I share my news now, when the very people who should have been proud of me would just dismiss it? Would they even care? Would they make it about her too, as they always did? I could already hear the whispers. I could already feel the weight of their judgment, their disdain for my need for recognition. And yet, it was happening. I had earned it, I had worked for it, and somehow that made everything even worse. There was a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. The news from Dr. Fleming should have been a triumph, but all I could feel was dread. The celebration was already planned. It wasn't for me, and it was never meant to be. How could I possibly fit into this narrative of success when my parents had already written a different one for me? My chest tightened. Was I doing this for the right reasons? Did I even want this recognition anymore? Or was I just seeking a way to prove something to them? Something they would never truly understand? Would they even acknowledge my hard work? Or would it be just another passing moment they would sweep under the rug? And what about Jessica? How would this affect her? She didn't deserve to feel like she was in competition with me. Not now. Not after everything. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. As I sat in my car, staring at the message on my phone from Dr. Fleming, the weight of it all began to crush me. My mind swirled with questions I couldn't answer, and a sick feeling twisted in my stomach. I had been waiting for something like this, something that would validate all my sacrifices, but now that it was happening, I didn't feel the triumph I expected. Instead, I felt like I was being pushed into a corner, caught between wanting to celebrate my achievements and dreading the public confrontation that would inevitably follow. I could already see it in my mind. My parents, their eyes wide with confusion and maybe even regret, as if they hadn't been the ones who shaped this narrative for years. The narrative where I was the resourceful one, the one who could fend for herself, while Jessica, always the needy one, was the focus of their attention, their care, their endless support. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the idea of having this announcement overshadow everything they had worked so hard to create. It was supposed to be Jessica's night, a celebration of everything they had invested in her. My parents had built this illusion, this perfect story about their two daughters. And now, suddenly, it was all about to unravel. Would they even be able to see me for what I had done? Or would they dismiss it as another fluke, another coincidence? I thought about Jessica, my twin sister, the person I had shared everything with, and yet we couldn't have been more different. She had always been the outgoing one, the one who never had to fight for attention. She had it all, or at least that's what I always assumed. I had been quietly resenting her, believing that she got everything I didn't. But now, for the first time in years, I wasn't so sure. I thought back to the years we spent in medical school, the countless times we had shared a laugh, supported each other through difficult rotations, and cried over long nights spent studying. We had always been close, always the perfect pair, until my achievements started to pull me away. Could she possibly understand? Could she see how all of this, the constant favoritism from our parents, the way they minimized my successes while praising hers, had slowly torn me apart? Did she even realize how much it hurt to always be compared to her, always to feel like I was competing for scraps of affection and recognition? It was one thing to be overlooked, to be the quieter, less visible twin, but it was another thing entirely to be made to feel like my accomplishments didn't matter, like they were secondary to Jessica's. How could she understand that, when she was always the one who had their attention? Was it too much to ask for them to see me, really see me, for who I was and what I had done? I could feel my pulse quicken as I replayed the conversation with my mother, the words still fresh in my mind. Jessica deserves it more. That phrase haunted me. And yet, I wondered, Had I been too harsh on her? Jessica had never asked for the favoritism. She never chose it. She had never stood in the way of my success. It wasn't her fault. But in the back of my mind there was always this gnawing resentment that I couldn't shake. I thought about the message from Jessica, the one she had sent just before I left my parents' house. Mom's going overboard for tonight. It's embarrassing. Wish she'd put this much effort into celebrating both of us graduating. See you there. The words stung. They shouldn't have, but they did. Because for the first time I felt like she was acknowledging it. The imbalance. The way my parents had always made it about her. But was that enough? Was a text message enough to make up for years of being invisible in my own family? I wanted to believe it was. I really did. But I couldn't help but feel uneasy. The more I thought about it, the more complicated things seemed. Could I ever escape this shadow? Could Jessica and I truly move forward, or was I always going to be the overlooked twin in their eyes? When I walked into the restaurant that night, everything about it felt like a stage, a performance put on just for Jessica. The banner that read, "Congratulations, Dr. Jessica," the guests mingling, their eyes all fixed on her. I smiled politely at the familiar faces, but I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that tonight wasn't just about Jessica's achievement, it was about the narrative my parents had been telling themselves for years. That Jessica was their success story. I tried to push the resentment away. I had to. Jessica needed me to be there for her, not to overshadow her moment. After all, the fellowship, the recognition, it was for me. This was Jessica's night. My night would come later. But as I scanned the room, my heart sank. There at the head table, my parents sat proudly next to Jessica. I was stuck in the background, just another guest at the table. It wasn't surprising, but it was still painful. It felt like I was being erased again. They never noticed how that felt, how their neglect had shaped me. I excused myself from the table, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone. I needed a moment to breathe, to clear my head. That was when I saw the next message from Dr. Fleming. "Are you ready for the announcement? I know it's not ideal timing, but we've been waiting for this for so long." The words were heavy with expectation. I couldn't ignore this. I couldn't back out now. But as I typed my response, I hesitated. What if this ruined everything? What if this announcement made things even worse with my family? Could I truly find peace in this moment, or was I only creating more chaos? Would they ever accept me for who I was, for what I had achieved on my own? Or was I always going to be a footnote in Jessica's story? I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. Yes, I'm ready. The moment I hit send on the message, a wave of nervous energy surged through me. The announcement wasn't just about my achievements, it was about confronting the years of invisible work, of quietly striving for validation that never came. In the blink of an eye, everything that I had worked so hard to achieve felt fragile, like a glass sculpture about to shatter. I had always walked on the periphery of my family's expectations, but tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't going to stand on the sidelines anymore. The party was in full swing. Guests were chatting in little clusters, glasses of champagne raised in celebration, laughter floating through the air. And yet, despite the vibrant energy of the event, I couldn't escape the hollow feeling in my chest. It felt as though the whole room was revolving around Jessica, as if no one could see anything beyond her. She was the star of the night, just as she always had been. And yet, as I looked at her, smiling and laughing with her friends, I felt an odd pang of sympathy. Jessica had always been the one who had to shine brightest, the one who could never let her guard down, never show any vulnerability. She had been the golden child in our parents' eyes, and though they never asked for her to be perfect, they sure expected her to. Tonight, I wondered if she felt the weight of it, too. I was about to turn back toward the bar when I heard her voice behind me. "Audrey, thank God you're here," Jessica exclaimed, rushing over to me. "Aunt Patty has asked me 5 times if I have a boyfriend yet. I can't handle this." I couldn't help but laugh, despite the tight knot in my stomach. "What did you tell her?" "That I'm married to medicine," Jessica said with a grin, then leaned in closer, her voice dropping lower. "But if she knows any eligible neurosurgeons, I'm taking applications." We both laughed then, our shared humor like a bridge between the years of tension that had kept us apart. It felt good, but only for a moment. I had forgotten how easy it was to be with her when we weren't competing, when we weren't trying to please our parents in the same way. Suddenly, my mother appeared, champagne in hand, pulling Jessica's attention away from me. "Jessica, the Hendersons just arrived. You remember Thomas Henderson, the chief of surgery at Cleveland Memorial? You should come say hello." "Of course, Mom," Jessica replied with a small smile, turning to follow her. But before she left, she turned back to me, a flicker of something soft in her eyes. "I'll catch you later, okay?" I nodded, watching her walk away, then turned back to the bustle of the party. But in that brief exchange, something shifted in me. Jessica had acknowledged, even if just in passing, that things weren't right. She had noticed the inequality. She had seen the divide. And though she never said it outright, she was starting to understand. I took a slow, steadying breath. My heart was still heavy, still unsure of what was coming. I had agreed to the announcement, but what did that mean for me? What did it mean for our relationship? The weight of my parents' expectations was still looming over me, suffocating me, but there was a part of me that felt an unfamiliar sense of relief. I was about to take control of my own narrative. The thought was intoxicating. As I walked toward the catering area to check on the food, trying to lose myself in the distraction of details, my phone buzzed again. It was Dr. Fleming. "Are you still okay with the announcement? I don't want to make you feel like this is more than you can handle." I paused, leaning against the counter, letting out a shaky breath. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I was okay with it anymore, but I couldn't back down. I had earned this moment, and it was time for the world to see that. "Yes, let's do it," I typed back, my fingers pressing the words with finality. I didn't need to think about it anymore. I had made my choice. When I turned back toward the crowd, Dr. Fleming was there, her crimson pantsuit cutting through the sea of guests like a beacon. She was poised, confident, the exact opposite of the uncertainty that plagued me. When our eyes met, she smiled warmly, though I could sense the steely determination behind her gaze. She was here for this moment, and so was I. Just as I was about to take a step forward, my father's voice rang out across the terrace, tapping his glass to gather the attention of the guests. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate our daughter Jessica's remarkable achievement," he said, his tone warm, practiced, as though delivering a speech he had rehearsed in front of a mirror. "As many of you know, medical school is a grueling journey, and to emerge not only with a degree but debt-free is truly something special." Applause followed, polite and measured. I felt a wave of nausea sweep over me. Everything about this moment was wrong, from the words to the timing. And yet, it was their reality. This was their world. A world where only Jessica's accomplishments were worthy of celebration. My gaze flicked toward Dr. Fleming. She was standing a few feet away, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. She knew what was coming, and in some way, I knew she was just as ready as I was to finally tear down the facade that had been built around. "I'd like to say a few words as well," Jessica suddenly announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. I blinked in surprise, watching her stand up, her face pale but determined. She met my eyes across the room, and for the first time in years I saw something other than guilt or discomfort. There was resolve in her expression. "I can't accept recognition that excludes my sister," she said, her voice steady, though I could hear the quiver of emotion underneath. "Audrey and I both graduated with identical GPAs. We both worked incredibly hard, and frankly, Audrey worked harder because she did it without the support system I had." The room fell silent, a stunned hush hanging in the air. I could feel the eyes of the guests on me, but it was Jessica I saw in that moment. She had stepped forward, not to apologize for our parents' actions, but to call out the injustice that had lived in our family for so long. Her words stung, but in a way, they also healed. Because for the first time in my life, someone who knew exactly what it was like to live in this family, was standing up for me. My parents exchanged glances, their faces betraying confusion and frustration, but before they could speak, Jessica's voice rang out again. "This celebration was meant to be about me, but it feels incomplete, because Audrey deserves this moment just as much as I do." Tears welled up in my eyes as I stood there, frozen in place. Everything I had been hoping for, everything I had been fighting for, was happening. My parents didn't see it yet, but the truth was finally coming out. It was all starting to unravel. And for the first time in years, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The tension that had been building for so long was slowly starting to crack open, and maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something new for both Jessica and me. The room remained eerily still, the silence stretching long after Jessica's words. My chest was tight, my throat constricted, and yet, as the seconds passed, I felt the strangest thing, a relief. For so long I had lived with this tension, this quiet resentment, and now, finally, it was out in the open. Jessica had spoken the words I could never bring myself to say. She had acknowledged what I had spent years swallowing in silence. I glanced at my parents, whose expressions were frozen, unsure of how to react. My father cleared his throat first, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. "Well, of course, we're proud of both of you," he said, his voice overly bright, too practiced, as if he were trying to salvage something that had already slipped away. "Audrey has done very well, too." I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. The emptiness in his words spoke volumes. It was always a struggle with them. Nothing ever felt like it came from a place of real pride for me. It always had a tone of detachment, of doing what they thought they should do because it was expected, not because they understood me, not because they saw me. But just as quickly as my father tried to smooth things over, I could feel the shift. The ripple of the truth had already begun to spread, and no amount of damage control could stop it now. I could see it in the way the guests now turned their heads, some of them glancing at me with recognition, others still processing what Jessica had just said. There were murmurs, soft and unsure, but they were looking at me. Finally, they were seeing me, seeing beyond the quiet, unassuming girl who had always been overshadowed. My mother, still holding the glass of champagne in her hand, looked at Jessica with wide eyes. Her expression was a mixture of disbelief and something else I couldn't quite place, perhaps guilt. "This isn't the time, Jessica," she said, her voice shaky. "Please, we're here to celebrate you." "But it's not just about me," Jessica replied, her voice firm, unyielding. "You know it, Mom, and I think Audrey deserves this recognition. I won't let this moment pass without giving her that." Her words hung in the air like a declaration of war. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't the way I had imagined it, but it was happening. I wasn't being overlooked anymore. I wasn't being silenced by the weight of their favoritism. Jessica was speaking for me now. She was speaking for both of us. I watched my parents' faces twist in discomfort, but they couldn't stop what was already in motion. This moment, this shift, had already become public. Their carefully constructed narrative was crumbling, bit by bit. And then, Dr. Fleming, sensing the perfect moment, rose from her seat. Her presence seemed to command the room as she stepped toward me. I felt her gaze before I saw her, like a weight settling in the air, firm and reassuring. She had been observing this family dynamic for 2 years now, and it was clear that she knew how to make her presence felt. The room fell quiet again as she approached, her crimson pantsuit glowing in the soft light of the restaurant. Her voice rang out like a clarion call, cutting through the tension that had already begun to build. "If I might add something," she said, her tone calm but strong, "I think this is a perfect opportunity to share some news that many of you may not be aware of." The room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Even my parents stiffened, clearly not expecting what was about to come. I felt the blood rush to my face, a mix of dread and exhilaration curling through me. "Audrey Collins has been selected for the Patterson Fellowship at Johns Hopkins University," Dr. Fleming continued. For those who may not be familiar, this is one of the most prestigious positions offered to a graduating medical student in the country. Audrey's research on neurovascular regeneration after traumatic injury has been groundbreaking. The selection committee was particularly impressed with her innovative approach, combining surgical techniques with pharmacological interventions. This fellowship is a rare and well-earned honor. The shock that followed was palpable. A collective gasp swept through the room as the reality of the announcement settled in. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room, but this time, they weren't just looking at me out of obligation or confusion. They were looking at me with admiration. The same admiration that had always been reserved for Jessica. I couldn't stop the tears that welled up in my eyes. For years, I had struggled under the weight of my family's favoritism, always feeling like my accomplishments meant nothing compared to Jessica's. But now, finally, someone had seen me for what I was. Dr. Fleming had recognized my potential, my worth, and she wasn't afraid to share it with the world. I looked across the room at my parents. They were staring at me now, wide-eyed, their faces a mix of surprise, confusion, and something else, something I couldn't quite name. This was it. This was the moment where their carefully curated image of the perfect family shattered before their eyes. The applause that followed Dr. Fleming's announcement only made it more real. I heard my name being called out by guests I had never spoken to, people I had never considered close friends or colleagues. But now, they were congratulating me, they were acknowledging me, and most importantly, they were seeing me. As the applause continued, I noticed Jessica standing beside me. She was smiling, her eyes bright with pride. She clinked her champagne glass against mine, her voice soft but clear. "Congratulations, sis," she said. "You deserve this." For a moment I could hardly process her words. The weight of the years of resentment, the years of being overshadowed, seemed to lift all at once. In that single exchange, in her acknowledgement, I felt a peace settle over me that I had longed for, but never thought I'd experience. "I didn't want to steal your moment," I whispered to her, my voice trembling slightly. She smiled, squeezing my shoulder. "This is your moment too, Audrey, and I'm proud of you. Always have been." I didn't know what to say. The words that had been trapped inside me for so long seemed to spill out at once, but they weren't words of anger or resentment. They were words of gratitude, of healing. The years of competing, of quietly fighting for validation, seemed so insignificant now. We were standing together, in the light of everything we had both accomplished. And as the evening unfolded, as the crowd continued to celebrate Jessica and my achievements, something shifted within me. The path ahead was still unclear, still daunting, but for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The expectations, the favoritism, the comparisons, they no longer defined me. And maybe, just maybe, my journey was finally mine to navigate. The evening passed in a blur. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses faded into the background, but I couldn't shake the weight of what had just happened. Dr. Fleming's announcement had shattered the perfect facade my parents had worked so hard to maintain. The applause, though well-intentioned, only reminded me of how much I had been denied. It felt like a release, like the chains I had carried for so long had finally been broken. But it was bittersweet. The recognition, though earned, felt strangely hollow when I thought of the years it had taken for my family to see me. As the party began to wind down, I found myself standing at the edge of the crowd, trying to make sense of everything that had transpired. The warmth of the celebration had long since faded, and in its place, a chill settled in my bones. I could feel the eyes of the guests on me, but their admiration wasn't what bothered me. It was the quiet aftermath of finally standing in the truth. The truth that I had always been on the outside looking in, that I had always been forced to fight for my place at the table. But now, I was sitting at the head of that table, whether my parents were ready for it or not. Dr. Fleming came over to me, her presence, a steady anchor in the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. "You handled that well," she said, her voice calm, almost knowing. "It's never easy to confront the truth, especially when it's been buried for so long." I nodded, but words caught in my throat. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I needed to process. I had just exposed the wound I had tried so hard to hide, and now I wasn't sure what to do with the rawness of it all. I turned toward the balcony, the cool night air brushing against my skin, and stepped outside, feeling the need for space. "Do you mind?" I asked softly, and Dr. Fleming, ever the understanding mentor, simply nodded and let me be. The city lights of Detroit stretched out before me, a vast sea of glowing orbs. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs, trying to clear my head. The night felt impossibly still, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to decide what came next. "Audrey," a familiar voice called from behind me. I turned to see Jessica approaching, her figure bathed in the dim light of the terrace. "I didn't want to interrupt," she said, standing a few feet away, "but I wanted to make sure you're okay." I looked at her, feeling the tug of emotion in my chest. I hadn't expected this from her. Not after all these years of silently competing for our parents' approval. But here she was, standing in front of me, offering something I hadn't realized I needed: a quiet solidarity. "I'm fine," I replied, though the words felt hollow. "I think I just need to process everything. It's a lot to take in." Jessica nodded, her eyes softening as she stepped closer. "I understand. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know how to speak up sooner, but I've been thinking about it for a while, about how they've always put me first without realizing it. I wanted to tell them so many times, but I guess I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't know how. I felt a rush of something, relief, gratitude, maybe even a little sadness, for how much she had been carrying too. She had never asked for this dynamic, for this constant imbalance, but she had been caught in it just as much as I had. "I never wanted to hurt you, Audrey," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. I thought this was the way things were supposed to be. But after tonight, I see how wrong it's been. I'm so proud of you. I always have been, even if I never said it out loud." Her words wrapped around me like a warm blanket, but there was an edge of something deeper in her tone. It wasn't just about our parents anymore. It was about us, about how we had spent years tiptoeing around the truth, afraid to speak up, afraid to confront what had always been so obvious to us both. "You don't have to apologize, Jess," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You didn't cause this. It was never about you and me. It was about them. They built this idea of who we were supposed to be. But we're not them, we never were." Jessica sighed, her shoulders slumping a little. "I know, but I didn't realize how much it hurt you until tonight. Seeing you finally get the recognition you deserved, it made me realize how much we've both been shaped by their favoritism, and how it's been tearing us apart." I wanted to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. For years I had resented her for getting all the attention, but standing here now, with the truth finally laid bare, I saw things differently. She had never asked for the preferential treatment. She hadn't asked for our parents to elevate her above me, but that didn't change the fact that it had happened. "I don't want to fight anymore," I said quietly, almost to myself. "I don't want this tension between us. I don't want to resent you. I just want us to move forward, without all of this baggage." Jessica stepped closer, her face softening. "I want that too. We've been through too much together to let this thing between us ruin our relationship. I know I can't fix the past, but I'll do better moving forward, for you." For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't perfect, and I knew it wouldn't be. There would be bumps along the way, new challenges to face. But something had shifted tonight. Something fundamental had broken free. And in that moment, standing next to Jessica, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could start moving forward without the weight of years of resentment holding me back. "You don't have to prove anything to me," I said, my voice quieter now. "You don't have to make up for the past. I know how much you've always cared. Tonight, it's enough." Jessica's eyes softened, and she reached out, pulling me into a hug. For the first time in years, I felt something shift in me. Not just the tension with our parents, but with her. We were finally free to move on, to find our own paths without the constant pressure of comparison. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but at least we weren't walking it alone anymore. As we stood there, wrapped in the quiet of the night, I realized that the journey I was about to embark on wasn't just about the Patterson Fellowship. It was about finally living my life on my own terms, without the weight of someone else's expectations. The road would be mine to navigate, and for the first time in a long time, that thought filled me with a deep sense of peace. And for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with who I was. The days following the celebration felt like a slow release of air from a balloon that had been inflated for far too long. The silence in the weeks that followed after the storm of truths and revelations was oddly soothing. I'd expected the tension to linger, for the awkwardness to hang in the air like a thick fog, but surprisingly, it didn't. Something in the air had shifted, and though it wasn't a perfect resolution, it was enough for me to feel the weight lift off my shoulders. Jessica and I began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't immediate. Healing never is. But there was something new between us, a deeper understanding that we hadn't had before. We spoke openly now, honestly, about the years we had spent walking parallel paths without ever truly acknowledging how different those paths had been. She didn't shy away from the discomfort anymore, and neither did I. There was no more pretending, no more silence. One evening, as I sat in my small apartment, the phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Jessica. "Hey sis," I answered, a smile creeping onto my face at the sound of her voice. "Hey Audrey," she said, her tone lighter than I had ever heard it. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about everything, and I just wanted to tell you something." I sat up a little straighter, sensing the seriousness in her voice. "What's up?" "I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner. I should have been more aware of how much you were doing on your own, and how hard it must have been. But I've been thinking about how we both need to stop measuring ourselves by what Mom and Dad think. And maybe we need to stop comparing ourselves to each other too." There was a brief pause, and then she added, "I want to make sure that when we move forward, it's on our own terms, not theirs." I felt a lump rise in my throat. She was finally seeing it. She was finally seeing me, truly seeing me. It was everything I had ever wanted, but in a way that didn't feel like a victory at her expense. "You're right," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I don't want to compete with you anymore, Jess. I don't want to fight for scraps of love and approval from them. We have our own lives to live." She sighed on the other end of the line, a sound that was filled with both relief and sadness. "Exactly. I don't want to keep carrying that around either. It's exhausting, and it's not even us, it's just how they've made us feel for years. But we don't have to live like that anymore, Audrey." I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of her words wash over me. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about us together, realizing that we had the power to define ourselves outside the walls our parents had built around us. We were more than their expectations, more than their disappointments. We were our own people, capable of forging our own paths. And then, just as quickly as the thought had entered my mind, something else clicked. This wasn't just about me and Jessica finding our way, it was about finally allowing ourselves to live our lives for ourselves, not for anyone else. "Thank you," I whispered into the phone. "I don't think I could have done this without you. I thought I had to do it all alone, but now I know I don't." There was a pause on the other end before Jessica responded, her voice quiet but sincere. "And you won't have to. We've got each other, no matter what." For the first time in years, I felt my heart open fully. For so long I had been angry, I had been hurt, I had wanted acknowledgement for my hard work, for my sacrifices, but what Jessica had just given me wasn't acknowledgement in the traditional sense. It wasn't a gift, a trophy, or even a grand gesture. It was something simpler. It was validation. The kind that wasn't wrapped in praise or public recognition, but in understanding, empathy, and support. Over the next few weeks, I dove into the work that awaited me at Johns Hopkins, the Patterson Fellowship, pulling me deeper into the world I had always dreamed of. The work was challenging, demanding, and sometimes exhausting. But it was my work. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was seeking anyone's approval as I worked. There was no shadow hanging over me, no need to prove myself to anyone. I was finally doing something for me. But even in this new chapter of my life, the change wasn't just professional. I noticed little things too. Subtle shifts in how I saw myself, and how I approached my relationship with my parents. It wasn't about avoiding them anymore, or about putting up walls to protect myself. I didn't need to beg for their attention anymore. I didn't need to be the perfect daughter they expected me to be. I could finally choose the life I wanted, the life I had worked for, and embrace it fully without looking over my shoulder for approval. One evening, several months into my fellowship, I received a call from my parents. My father's voice was quieter than usual, and I could tell he was choosing his words carefully. "Audrey, we've been thinking," he started. We wanted to apologize for how we've treated you, for not recognizing everything you've done on your own, everything you've accomplished without our help." I stood still, hearing his words for the first time. The apology was long overdue, and yet, I wasn't sure how to feel. My first instinct was to shrug it off, to tell him it didn't matter. But as I listened to him speak, I realized that he was finally acknowledging what I had spent years trying to show him. "It's been hard for us to admit," he continued. That we haven't been there for you the way we should have. We've always been so focused on Jessica, but you've done so much. You've worked so hard. His voice trailed off, and I was left standing there holding the phone, trying to process his words. I hadn't expected this, but in some way I realized it didn't change anything. The past was still the past. But the present? The present was mine. I appreciate that, Dad, I said softly. But I've learned to be proud of what I've done, regardless of your support. I've had to make my own way, and I'm okay with that. I'm happy with where I am now. There was a long pause before he spoke again, his voice strained with emotion. I'm proud of you, Audrey, more than you know. I didn't know what to say to that. But somehow I didn't need to. I had already found the recognition I needed. Not from my parents, but from myself. I hung up the phone that evening, feeling at peace. Not because my parents had apologized, not because I'd gotten the validation I'd wanted for so long, but because I had found my own validation. I had learned to live my life for me, on my terms, with or without anyone's approval. And as I continued my journey at Johns Hopkins, I knew this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them. I was finally walking my path, unapologetically, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to carry the weight of anyone's expectations but my own. It's funny how quickly a year can pass when you're finally living the life you've always wanted. When I first arrived at Johns Hopkins, everything felt like a blur. There was so much to learn, so much to prove, and so much pressure to live up to the incredible opportunity I'd been given. I was in a new city, surrounded by people who were just as driven as I was, all competing for a slice of the same highly coveted research positions. But there was something different about this environment. There was something uniquely freeing about the work I was doing. I wasn't constantly comparing myself to anyone else anymore. There was no need to fight for recognition, no constant pulling at my sleeves from my parents or anyone else. I had arrived on my own merit, and for the first time in my life that was enough. I didn't feel like I had to prove my worth to anyone. I was finally just doing it. The lab was where I thrived. I spent long hours there, often losing myself in the data in the minutiae of research. Every breakthrough felt like a small victory, not just for my research, but for me as a person. I wasn't just a shadow anymore. I was building something real, something that would stand on its own. The Patterson Fellowship had opened so many doors, but it was up to me to walk through them. And I did so without hesitation. I'd been given the time and the space to really dive into my work, to take risks and make mistakes, and to learn from both. And with each passing month, I grew more confident in my role. I no longer doubted my worth. There was still so much left to learn, but I was no longer afraid to face challenges. I knew I could handle them. I had proven that to myself, and that meant more to me than anything else. But despite all the professional growth, it wasn't just the lab that kept me going. It was the friendships I was beginning to build. In a way, the medical world at Johns Hopkins was not so different from my past experiences, but there was a difference in how I interacted with it now. I wasn't trying to be the best. I wasn't trying to fight for the approval of anyone. I was just there, just one person among many, carving out my own space. And somehow, it made all the difference. I found myself eating lunch with people who shared my passion for research, but also had lives outside the lab. We talked about more than just medicine. We talked about everything: our families, our childhoods, our hopes for the future. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to hide parts of myself. I could be fully me. No more pretending, no more carefully constructed facades. It was a revelation to find people who accepted me for who I was, not who I was expected to be. And then there were the calls home. As much as I had changed, so had my relationship with my parents. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when the old patterns would creep in, but it was better. I could feel their pride now, even if it came late. My father's voice was steadier when he spoke to me, and my mother's words had less of that familiar undertone of disappointment. They were starting to see me, not just as the child they had hoped I would be, but as the woman I had become. One night, a few months into my fellowship, I got a message from Jessica. It was late, and I hadn't expected to hear from her, but I smiled as I saw her name flash across my screen. "How's Baltimore?" she asked, her message simple but warm. "I was thinking about you. How's everything going?" I responded almost immediately. "It's great, busy, but good. I'm really starting to feel like I belong here. Finally." Her reply came quickly, as though she'd been waiting for me to say that. "I'm glad to hear it, Audrey. I've been really proud of you. You've come so far. It's hard to believe how much has changed." I leaned back in my chair, looking at the words on my screen. Her message didn't just reflect pride, it was a sign of something deeper. It wasn't just about being proud of my achievements anymore. It was about truly seeing me, not as the sibling to compare, but as someone with her own life, her own path. I thought about how much I had changed over the past year. How much my relationship with Jessica had changed. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to compete with her. We were finally able to support each other in ways that felt authentic, and it felt good. "Thanks, Jess," I replied, my fingers typing slowly as I tried to put into words what I was feeling. "I never thought I'd say this, but I think I'm finally starting to understand everything you've been trying to tell me all along." Her response came a few minutes later. "I'm happy to hear that. We're finally in a place where we can just be us, without all the baggage from the past. That feels good, doesn't it?" It felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest. It felt like we were truly starting over, not just as sisters, but as individuals who had found their own places in the world. I knew that our relationship would never be perfect. It would never be without its challenges. But it was ours. And that was enough. A few weeks later, I found myself on a video call with my parents, something I'd grown accustomed to during my time at Johns Hopkins. We talked about everything: my research, the progress I was making, and even small details about life in Baltimore. My mother asked about the weather, and my father gave me advice about how to manage stress, even though, in his typical way, it was a little more condescending than helpful. But still, it was different. It was warmer. There was an ease to the conversation that hadn't been there before. I could hear the pride in their voices now, and while it didn't erase the past, it was a start. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fight for their approval. I was content. I was doing the work I had always dreamed of, and I was finally at peace with myself. No amount of recognition or acknowledgement could take away from that. As the video call ended, my father said, "We're proud of you, Audrey. We always have been." For the first time, I didn't need to say anything back. I just nodded, a small, genuine smile crossing my face. The words had been said, and they were enough. The future was still uncertain. There would always be obstacles ahead. But I was ready for them. This life was mine, and for the first time, I felt like I could own it completely. This was the beginning of the rest of my life. As the months passed, the changes I had experienced in the past year became more than just visible. They were internal. My identity no longer felt like a collection of fragmented pieces waiting to be assembled. I was whole. I had carved out a space for myself in the world, both professionally and personally. And more than anything, I was finally at peace with who I was, with where I had been, and where I was going. Life at Johns Hopkins continued to be demanding, but I welcomed the challenge. Every research project I worked on, every hypothesis I tested, felt like a personal triumph. I could feel the weight of my past, the years of being overlooked, of trying to prove myself to others, finally lifting. I no longer needed anyone's approval to validate my existence or my work. I had found something more powerful: my own sense of worth. There were still days when I missed home, missed the familiarity of my family's chaotic dynamics. There were still moments when the ghost of my parents' favoritism would whisper in the back of my mind, but I had learned how to silence it. I had learned how to focus on the now, on what I was building, not just for myself, but for the future I wanted to create. One evening, as I sat in my office, reading through a research paper on neurovascular regeneration, I received a text from Jessica. It was simple, but it brought a smile to my face. "Thinking of you. Hope you're taking care of yourself. Miss you, sis. Can't wait to catch up soon." I stared at the message for a long time, letting the warmth of it settle over me. A few years ago, I would have been unable to even imagine a text like that from her, one without a layer of competition or guilt attached. But now, I knew that everything had changed. We had grown. We had both found our own paths, but we were still bound by something stronger than just family: understanding, empathy, and finally love. I typed back quickly, "I miss you too, I've been busy, but it's good. I'm happy here. Really happy." I put down my phone and leaned back in my chair, the weight of the past finally gone. The sense of self-doubt that had plagued me for so long was no longer there. It had taken time, patience, and above all, the willingness to let go of things that no longer served me. Things that had once defined me, like my parents' expectations and my own insecurities. As much as I had learned in the lab, I had learned more about myself during this journey. It was about more than just academic achievements. It was about finding peace within myself, understanding that the love and validation I had always sought from others would never come until I first gave it to myself. And then, one afternoon, as I walked through the hallways of Johns Hopkins, I received another unexpected message. It was from Dr. Fleming, my mentor, the one who had seen something in me when no one else had. She had always believed in me, but now she was offering me something more: an opportunity. "Audrey, I've been speaking with several of my colleagues, and we all agree. Your work has been groundbreaking. We'd like to offer you a permanent position here at Johns Hopkins, leading a new research team focusing on traumatic brain injuries. We think you have the potential to change the field, and we'd love to support you in doing that." I stood still for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. This was it, the culmination of everything I had worked for, everything I had dreamed about: a permanent position, a chance to lead. I had earned this, on my own. No one could take this away from me. I could feel the tears well up in my eyes as I read the message again, realizing how far I had come. The girl who had once been overshadowed, the one who had fought for scraps of validation, was now standing on the precipice of a new chapter. This was what it had all been building toward. Not just the research or the accolades, but the chance to shape my own future, to leave my mark on the world in a way that felt authentic and meaningful. I quickly replied to Dr. Fleming, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed, "Thank you. I'm honored. I'd be thrilled to take on the position. Let's do this." As I sent the message, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing after anything. I wasn't running to catch up with others, trying to prove myself, or waiting for someone's approval. I had found my place. I was leading my own journey, building my future on my terms. And that was all I had ever needed. Later that evening, as I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out over the city, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The stars above seemed to sparkle a little brighter that night, and I wondered if that was just my own heart lighting up from within. I wasn't defined by my past anymore. I wasn't defined by my family's expectations, or by any doubts that had once plagued me. I was defined by my own work, my own choices, and the life I had built from the ground up. And as the cool evening breeze brushed against my face, I realized that, finally, I was free. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning.